The cake was a masterpiece, a three-tiered princess castle with pink frosting turrets and sparkling sugar windows. My daughter, Lily, her face glowing with the light of 7 candles, took a deep breath and blew. The room, filled with her little friends and my husband's family, erupted in applause. I beamed, feeling a rare, uncomplicated moment of joy. My mother-in-law, Helen, handed me the knife. As I made the first cut, the knife hit something solid. Frowning, I dug deeper and pulled out a small, plastic-wrapped scroll. "What's this?" Lily asked, her eyes wide with curiosity. She unrolled the tiny piece of paper. The festive chatter in the room died down as she began to read the words aloud. "Dear Lily," she read, her sweet voice clear and innocent. "Your mommy is a liar." Everyone froze. The silence was absolute, a cold, heavy blanket smothering the happy atmosphere. My husband, Liam, stared at me, his face a mask of confusion. But I wasn't looking at him. I was looking at my sister-in-law, Chloe, who was smiling, a tiny, triumphant smirk, and in that moment I knew. The war I had been trying to avoid my entire marriage had just been declared, and the first shot was fired from inside a princess cake. Before I continue the story, please subscribe. I need to reach 1,000 subscribers so I can keep bringing you stories like this every day. It's just one click for you, but it means a lot to me. My relationship with my husband's family, particularly his mother, Helen, and his younger sister, Chloe, had always been a masterclass in passive aggression. A delicate dance on a floor littered with eggshells. I was an outsider from the moment Liam introduced me. I wasn't from their small, insular town. My family wasn't old money, but rather no money. I was a scholarship kid who had worked her way through college, and in their eyes that made me ambitious, which they used as a synonym for grasping. Helen was the matriarch, a woman who wielded politeness like a weapon. Her compliments were always double-edged swords, designed to leave you bleeding without ever knowing where the cut came from. "Oh, Sophia, that dress is so brave," she'd say, her eyes sweeping over my department store, fined with a look of pity. "It's wonderful that you don't care what other people think." Chloe, on the other hand, was the golden child, the sun around which the family planetarium revolved. She was beautiful, charming, and had never worked a day in her life. Her career was a series of expensive hobbies funded by her parents, a failed jewelry line, a short-lived foray into pottery, and now a passion for gourmet baking. She was the artist, the sensitive soul, and I was the practical, boring one who balanced spreadsheets for a living. Liam, my husband, was the buffer, the peacekeeper. He loved his family, but he was not blind to their faults. He saw the subtle digs, the backhanded compliments, the way they constantly tried to undermine me. He was my staunchest defender, my partner in every sense of the word. He was the reason I tolerated the weekly Sunday dinners, the endless litany of Chloe's latest triumphs, and Helen's saccharine sweet condescension. For years, I played the part of the good daughter-in-law. I smiled, I nodded, I brought perfectly chilled bottles of wine to dinner. I absorbed the slights and pretended not to notice the barbs. I did it for Liam. I did it for the sake of peace. I convinced myself it was a small price to pay for a happy marriage, but the price was getting steeper. The small cuts were adding up, and I was starting to feel the slow, steady drain of 1,000 tiny wounds. The peace I was keeping was a one-sided ceasefire, and I was the only one unarmed. The lead-up to Lily's 7th birthday party was a perfect storm of familial tension. The theme, a princess castle party, was Lily's own choice, and she had been planning it for months with the meticulous attention to detail only a 6-year-old can muster. The guest list was a mix of her school friends and our family. I had wanted to keep it small, a simple backyard affair with pizza and games, but Helen would not hear of it. "Darling, a 7th birthday is a milestone," she had insisted, her voice dripping with faux concern. "It must be done properly. We can't have Lily's little friends thinking we don't know how to celebrate our own granddaughter. Done properly, of course, was code for done Helen's way. This meant a catered lunch, extravagant decorations, and a guest list that ballooned to include distant cousins and old family friends I had never met. Every decision became a battleground. I wanted to hire a local party entertainer who did magic tricks. Helen insisted on a string quartet because it was more refined. I wanted to serve cupcakes. Helen declared them common and insisted on a multi-tiered cake. And who would bake this cake? Why, Chloe, of course. It was the perfect opportunity for her to showcase her talent. Chloe has been taking a course in advanced sugar work, Helen announced at Sunday dinner, as if her daughter had just been accepted into medical school. She has the most divine idea for a Princess Castle cake. It will be her gift to Lily. I had my reservations. Chloe's previous baking endeavours had been more aesthetically pleasing than edible. Her macarons were notoriously hard, and her cupcakes often had a strange chemical aftertaste. But to refuse her offer would have been a declaration of war. It would have been seen as a slight against Chloe's artistry, a rejection of her generosity. So, I smiled and said, "That sounds wonderful. Lily will be so excited." Liam saw the look on my face. Later that evening, he wrapped his arms around me. "Are you okay with this?" he asked. "The cake, my mom taking over everything." I sighed, leaning back against him. "It's fine," I said, the lie tasting like chalk in my mouth. "It's just for one day. It's easier to just let them have their way, is it?" he asked quietly. "Is it really easier?" The question hung in the air between us. The truth was, it wasn't easier. It was just a different kind of hard. It was the hard work of swallowing my own opinions, of constantly placating two grown women who behaved like spoiled children, of feeling like a guest at my own daughter's party. But I had been doing it for so long, I had forgotten there was another way to live. The week of the party, my house became Helen's command center. She would arrive every morning, a whirlwind of opinions and unsolicited advice. She rearranged my furniture, criticized my choice of paper napkins, and suggested a different playlist for the party. Each suggestion was delivered with a sweet smile that made it impossible to argue. "Oh, Sophia, darling," she'd say, holding up two different shades of pink streamers. "This one is just a touch more sophisticated, don't you think?" Chloe was a less frequent, but more disruptive, presence. She would flit in and out, her arms laden with expensive baking supplies, treating my kitchen as her personal studio. She'd leave a trail of flour and powdered sugar in her wake, sighing dramatically about the poor quality of my oven and the lack of natural light. She spoke about the cake in hushed, reverent tones, as if it were a priceless work of art. "The structural integrity of the turrets is paramount," she'd announced to no one in particular. "I'm using a Belgian chocolate for the ganache that costs a fortune, but it's the only one with the right viscosity." I tried to stay out of their way, retreating to my home office to work, the sound of their low, conspiratorial murmurs a constant distraction. I overheard snippets of their conversations, phrases that made the hair on my arms stand up. "She has no real sense of style. Poor thing. Liam deserves someone who understands our family's standards. At least Lily has us to expose her to a little culture." They were talking about me. They were standing in my house, eating my food, and dissecting my perceived flaws with the precision of surgeons, and I was supposed to pretend I didn't hear. I was supposed to be grateful for their help. The stress was a constant, low-grade fever. I wasn't sleeping well. I had a permanent knot of anxiety in my stomach. I felt like an intruder in my own home, a stranger in my own life. Liam saw it all. He would come home from work to find me pale and exhausted, and his jaw would tighten with a quiet fury. He confronted his mother several times, his voice low and firm. "Mom, you need to back off. This is Sophia's house. This is Lily's party. You are a guest." Helen's reaction was always the same. Her eyes would fill with tears, her lower lip would tremble, and she would accuse him of being ungrateful. "I'm only trying to help," she'd whisper, her voice cracking. "I just want everything to be perfect for my granddaughter. I never thought my own son would turn on me like this." It was a masterful performance, and it always worked. Liam would end up apologizing, and Helen would get her way. She had perfected the art of making her aggression look like vulnerability. She was a wolf who had convinced everyone she was a wounded lamb. The day of the party arrived, a bright, sunny Saturday. Our backyard had been transformed into a pink and purple princess wonderland, exactly as Helen had envisioned. The string quartet was playing a surprisingly pleasant rendition of a song from a popular children's movie. The caterers were setting up a buffet of tiny, elegant sandwiches and pastel-colored macarons. It was all very beautiful, and it felt completely alien to me. Lily was ecstatic, twirling in her princess dress, her eyes shining with pure joy. Her happiness was the only thing that made the whole charade bearable. My in-laws arrived an hour early, Helen in a crisp linen dress, and Chloe in a flowing bohemian gown that looked wildly out of place at a child's birthday party. Chloe was carrying the cake, holding it aloft like a religious relic. It was, I had to admit, impressive. A three-tiered castle, complete with towers, flags, and a tiny sugar-spun princess who bore a striking resemblance to Lily. "Oh, Chloe, it's a masterpiece," Helen gushed, clapping her hands together. "You are a true artist," Chloe beamed, lapping up the praise. "It was nothing," she said, with a dismissive wave of her hand, a gesture that was meant to convey humility, but only screamed arrogance. The buttercream was a bit temperamental, but I managed to tame it. The guests began to arrive, a mix of bewildered parents from Lily's school and my husband's extended family. The school parents looked slightly intimidated by the scale of the event, their simple, brightly wrapped gifts looking out of place next to the mountain of expensive presents from my in-laws. I tried to make everyone feel welcome, flitting between conversations, offering drinks, and making small talk, but I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if I were watching the party from a great distance. This wasn't my party, it was Helen's party. It was Chloe's party. I was just the host, the smiling, accommodating figurehead. Liam stuck close to my side, his hand a constant, reassuring presence on the small of my back. He could see the strain on my face, the forced brightness of my smile. "Just a few more hours," he murmured in my ear. "And then we can have our real party with pizza and a movie, just the three of us." I leaned into him, grateful for his solidarity. He was my anchor in this sea of pastel-colored insanity. The party progressed smoothly, a well-oiled machine of Helen's making. The children played games, the adults made polite conversation, and the string quartet played on. It was all very civilized, very controlled, and completely devoid of the chaotic, joyful energy of a typical children's party. It felt less like a celebration and more like a performance, a carefully staged production designed to showcase the family's good taste and social standing. And I was beginning to realize that I was the only one who hadn't been given a script. The moment of the cake cutting arrived. All the children gathered around the table, their faces alight with anticipation. Helen orchestrated the scene, positioning Lily in the center, making sure the lighting was perfect for the photos. "Now everyone, let's sing," she commanded, and the guests launched into a slightly disjointed rendition of Happy Birthday. Lily, beaming, blew out the 7 pink candles in a single puff. The applause was enthusiastic. "Time for the cake," one of the children shouted, and a chorus of excited squeals followed. Helen handed me a large, ornate silver knife. "Here you are, Sophia, dear," she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "You do the honors." I took the knife, its weight unfamiliar in my hand. I looked at the cake, at Chloe's perfect sugary creation. It felt wrong to cut into it, to destroy something that had been the source of so much drama and effort. But Lily was looking at me, her eyes pleading. "Mommy, I want a turret," she said. I smiled at her, a real smile this time. "A turret it is," I said. I positioned the knife over one of the pink towers. As I pressed down, I felt a strange resistance. The knife hit something hard, something that wasn't cake. I frowned, pushing harder. There was a soft crackle, and I pulled the knife back. Embedded in the slice of cake was a small, cylindrical object, wrapped in clear plastic. "What's that?" Liam asked, leaning in for a closer look. I carefully extracted the object from the cake. It was a tiny scroll of paper, tied with a thin pink ribbon. "It looks like a message," I said, my voice a little shaky. A murmur went through the crowd. This was clearly part of the show, another one of Helen and Chloe's elaborate touches. "How clever!" My aunt-in-law gushed. "A message in a bottle, or a cake!" Lily's eyes were wide with excitement. "Can I read it, Mommy? Please?" Before I could answer, Chloe stepped forward, a smug, self-satisfied smile on her face. "Of course, darling," she said to Lily. "It's a special birthday message, just for you." She winked at me, a gesture that was supposed to look friendly but felt sharp and malicious. A cold knot of dread formed in my stomach. Something was wrong. This wasn't a clever party favor. This was something else entirely. I watched, my heart pounding, as Lily carefully untied the ribbon and unrolled the small piece of paper. The festive chatter in the room died down as everyone leaned in, eager to hear the special message. Lily, a confident new reader, held the paper up and began to read in her sweet, clear voice. And with 6 simple words, my carefully constructed world of polite smiles and swallowed truths came crashing down around me. "Dear Lily," she began, her brow furrowed in concentration, "your mommy is a liar." The words hung in the air, sharp and glittering as shards of glass. For a moment, no one moved. It was as if the world had stopped spinning. The children looked confused, their happy, sugar-fueled energy instantly extinguished. The adults stared, their polite smiles frozen on their faces. The silence was absolute, a vacuum that sucked all the air out of the room. Then, slowly, every eye turned to me. I stood there, the silver knife still in my hand, my face burning with a heat that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun. I felt naked, exposed, as if I had been stripped bare in front of a crowd of strangers. My mind was a chaotic swirl of disbelief and a horrifying, dawning certainty. This was not a mistake. This was not a joke. This was a deliberate, calculated act of cruelty, delivered with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. My gaze snapped to Chloe. She was standing by the dessert table, a picture of innocence in her flowing dress, but she had forgotten to school her features. A tiny, triumphant smirk played on her lips, and her eyes glittered with a malicious glee. She was enjoying this. She had planned this. This was her masterpiece. Not the cake, but this moment of my utter and complete humiliation. Beside her, Helen looked shocked, her hand flying to her chest in a gesture of pure melodrama. But I saw the flicker of something else in her eyes, a flash of satisfaction that she quickly concealed. She was a co-conspirator, an accomplice in her daughter's character assassination. Liam was the first to react. He moved to my side, his body a solid, protective shield. He took the knife from my nerveless fingers and placed it on the table. He put his arm around me, his grip firm and grounding. "What is this?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous, his eyes fixed on his sister. "What the hell is this, Chloe?" Chloe's smirk vanished, replaced by a look of wide-eyed innocence. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I just baked the cake. I didn't put anything inside it." It was a pathetic, transparent lie, and everyone knew it. The atmosphere in the room had shifted from shocked silence to a low, angry murmur. The party was over. The carefully constructed facade of happy family life had been blown to smithereens. And in the rubble I stood, not with the shame and humiliation they had intended, but with a cold, clear rage that was unlike anything I had ever felt before. The peace I had worked so hard to keep was a fiction. The family I had tried so hard to be a part of was a nest of vipers, and I had finally been bitten. The chaos erupted. The parents of Lily's friends, sensing a level of adult drama they wanted no part of, began to gather their children, making hurried, awkward excuses. "So sorry, we have to run, another party to get to." It was a lovely party, Sophia, really. Their eyes were filled with a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. They were fleeing a sinking ship, and I couldn't blame them. My own extended family-in-law was in a state of agitated confusion, whispering amongst themselves, casting furtive glances at me, at Chloe, at Helen. They were like a flock of birds, startled by a loud noise, unsure of which way to fly. Helen, ever the actress, burst into tears. "I can't believe this is happening," she wailed, dabbing at her dry eyes with a linen napkin. "On my granddaughter's special day. Who would do such a terrible thing?" She looked around the room, her gaze landing on me with a look of profound suspicion, as if to suggest that I, the victim, was somehow the perpetrator. It was a classic gaslighting technique designed to deflect, to confuse, to shift the blame. But it wasn't working. Not this time. Liam was a rock. He ignored his mother's theatrics and kept his focus squarely on his sister. "Chloe, I'm going to ask you one more time," he said, his voice dangerously calm. "Did you put that note in the cake?" Chloe, cornered, resorted to the family's ultimate defense mechanism, victimhood. "Why are you attacking me?" she cried, her voice rising to a shrill pitch. "I worked for days on this cake. I poured my heart and soul into it for Lily, and this is the thanks I get? You always take her side. You never believe me." She pointed a trembling finger at me. "She's the one you should be questioning. She's the liar. She's been trying to turn you against us since the day she met you." The accusation was so audacious, so completely divorced from reality, that it had the opposite of its intended effect. It didn't make me look guilty, it made her look unhinged. I looked at my daughter Lily. She was standing by the table, her little face pale and confused, the crumpled note still clutched in her hand. The joy had been stolen from her special day ruined by the petty, cruel games of the adults who were supposed to protect her. And that's when the rage inside me solidified into something hard and sharp. This wasn't about me anymore. This wasn't about my hurt feelings or my public humiliation. This was about my child. They had used my daughter as a weapon in their twisted war against me. And that was a line that could never be uncrossed. I walked over to Lily and knelt down in front of her. I gently took the note from her hand and tucked it into my pocket. I looked into her wide, worried eyes. "Sweetheart," I said, my voice soft but steady. "I'm so sorry. Some people do very silly, mean things when they are unhappy. But it has nothing to do with you, and it has nothing to do with the truth, okay?" She nodded, her lower lip trembling. I hugged her tightly, shielding her from the toxic fallout that was still swirling around us. When I stood up, I was no longer the smiling, accommodating Sophia. I was a mother. And I was done being quiet. I turned to face the room, my arm still wrapped protectively around Lily's shoulders. The remaining guests, mostly family, fell silent, their attention fixed on me. I met Helen's tear-streaked face, Chloe's indignant glare, and the confused, anxious expressions of my various aunts and uncles-in-law. For years, I had been silent in these family gatherings, a passive observer in my own life. That silence was now over. "I think it's time for everyone to leave," I said, my voice clear and cold. It was not a request, it was a command. Helen gasped, clutching her chest. "Sophia, you can't be serious. We are your family." "My family," I repeated, the word tasting like poison in my mouth, "would not try to ruin my daughter's 7th birthday party with a cruel and malicious prank. My family would not use a child to wage their petty, pathetic wars." I looked directly at Chloe, my eyes narrowed. "You want to know what the lie is, Chloe?" "The lie is this happy, perfect family you all pretend to be. The lie is the fake smiles and the backhanded compliments and the constant simmering resentment you try to pass off as love. The lie is that you are a talented artist and not just a spoiled, entitled woman who has never had to work for anything in her life." Chloe's face went white with fury. "How dare you?" she shrieked. "You see?" she said, turning to the room at large. "You see what she's like? This is what I have to deal with. This is the real Sophia." "Yes," I said, my voice ringing with a conviction that surprised even me. "Yes, it is. The real Sophia is done. She is done being your punching bag. She is done pretending your condescension is concern. She is done funding your failed business ventures with the money she and Liam work hard for." This last part was a shot in the dark, but I saw from the flicker of panic in her eyes that it had hit its mark. "And most of all," I continued, my voice dropping to a low, intense whisper, "she is done letting you hurt her child. You can attack me all you want, but you will never, ever, use my daughter as a pawn in your games again. Are we clear?" The silence that followed was thick with a new kind of tension. The power dynamic had shifted irrevocably. I was no longer the outsider, the supplicant, the one desperate for their approval. I was the one in control. I was the one setting the terms. And the first term was that they were no longer welcome in my home. "Now," I said, my voice returning to its normal volume, "get out." No one moved. They were all frozen, stunned into immobility by the sheer force of my transformation. They had never seen this version of me before. They didn't know how to react. It was Liam who broke the spell. He stepped forward and opened the back door that led to the driveway. "You heard my wife," he said, his voice quiet but unyielding. "The party's over." He looked at his mother, his expression a mixture of disappointment and disgust. "Mom, go home." Helen, for the first time since I had known her, looked utterly defeated. Her tears were real now, tears of shock and wounded pride. She had lost control of the narrative, of her son, of the entire situation. She stumbled towards the door, supported by my father-in-law, who looked grey and diminished. Chloe was the last to leave. She walked past me, her head held high, her face a mask of pure hatred. "You will regret this, Sophia," she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "You have just made a very big mistake." "No, Chloe," I replied, my voice equally quiet. "The mistake was yours. You thought I was weak. You thought I would just stand here and take it. You underestimated me, and you underestimated my husband. That was your mistake." She stared at me for a long moment, then turned and walked out the door, slamming it behind her. The silence that descended on our backyard was a blessed relief. It was just the three of us now, me, Liam, and Lily, standing amidst the wreckage of a ruined party. The beautiful decorations now looked garish and sad. The string quartet had long since packed up and left. The half-eaten cake sat on the table, a monument to my sister-in-law's cruelty. Lily, who had been watching the entire exchange with wide, silent eyes, finally spoke. "Is Auntie Chloe mad at me?" she asked, her voice small. I knelt down and hugged her again, my heart aching for her. "No, sweetheart," I said, stroking her hair. "She's not mad at you, she's mad at me. And that's okay. Sometimes grown-ups get mad when they don't get their way." Liam knelt down beside us, wrapping his arms around both of us. "Your mom is the strongest person I know," he said to Lily, his eyes meeting mine over her head. "And she is a truth teller, not a liar. Never forget that." In that moment, surrounded by the debris of my old life, I felt a sense of clarity and purpose I had never known. The war was not over. I knew that. This was just the first battle. But for the first time I wasn't afraid. I had my family, my real family, by my side, and I had the truth, and I was finally ready to fight. The days that followed the disastrous birthday party were a strange combination of radio silence and escalating psychological warfare. My in-laws, as expected, did not call to apologize. Instead, they launched a covert campaign to paint me as the villain, the hysterical, unhinged woman who had ruined her own daughter's party with a wild, paranoid outburst. The first salvo came from my aunt-in-law, Brenda, a woman whose primary personality trait was a lack of a personality of her own. She was Helen's echo, her loyal foot soldier. She called me a few days after the party, her voice oozing with a syrupy, false concern. "Sophia, dear," she began, "I was just calling to see how you were doing. We were all so worried about you on Saturday. You seemed so overwrought." I refused to take the bait. "I'm fine, Brenda," I said, my voice cool and even. "I was just disappointed that Chloe and Helen chose to behave so abominably." Brenda clucked her tongue. "Now, Sophia, I'm sure it was all just a misunderstanding, a silly joke that went wrong. Chloe feels just terrible about it, and your mother-in-law is simply devastated. She said she's never seen you so angry. It wasn't like you at all." "You're right," I said. "It wasn't. The old me would have smiled and pretended it didn't happen. The new me doesn't have time for that kind of nonsense." I could hear her sputtering on the other end of the line as I politely ended the call. The next attack was more insidious. A few of the mothers from Lily's school, the ones who had been at the party, called me with similar stories. They had all received a long, rambling email from Helen. The email, which they awkwardly summarized for me, was a masterpiece of manipulation. It spoke of her deep love for her granddaughter, her heartbreak over the unfortunate incident at the party, and her concern for my fragile emotional state. It subtly implied that I was unstable, that I had overreacted to a harmless prank, and that I was trying to alienate Liam from his loving, supportive family. It was a smear campaign, designed to isolate me, to discredit me, to make me look like the crazy one. A few years ago, it would have worked. I would have been consumed with anxiety, with the need to defend myself, to explain my side of the story. But now, something had shifted inside me. Their games seemed so transparent, so pathetic. Their attempts to control the narrative were clumsy and desperate. They were losing, and they knew it. Liam was my rock through all of it. He read the email his mother had sent, his face growing darker with every word. He called his Aunt Brenda and told her, in no uncertain terms, to stop harassing his wife. He was a united front, a wall of unwavering support, and that made all the difference. One evening, as we were cleaning up after dinner, he turned to me, his expression serious. "I've been thinking," he said, "about Chloe, about the money." I looked at him, my heart skipping a beat. "What about it?" "You said something at the party," he said. "About funding her business ventures. You were guessing, weren't you?" I nodded. "It was a lucky shot. Maybe not so lucky," he said, his eyes troubled. "I think we need to take a look at our finances, a very close look." That night, after Lily was asleep, Liam and I sat down at our dining room table with our laptops. The air was thick with a nervous electric tension. We had always been a team in our finances, open and transparent. We had a joint account for household expenses and our own separate savings accounts. We had always assumed a level of mutual trust that now felt dangerously naive. We started with the joint account. For hours, we scrolled through years of statements, line by line. At first, everything seemed normal. Mortgage payments, utility bills, grocery store charges. But then, Liam pointed to a recurring charge, a transfer of several $100s every month to an account I didn't recognize. "What's this?" he asked, his voice tight. The transfers were labeled loan repayment. They had been happening for over 3 years. I stared at the screen, a cold, sick feeling spreading through my stomach. I had never seen these before. I had never authorized them. Liam's face was pale. He clicked on the account details. The account belonged to Chloe. The loan repayment was not a repayment, it was a payment. We were paying for a loan she had taken out, but it got worse. We started digging into our credit card statements, the ones linked to the joint account. And there they were, a constellation of charges from high-end boutiques, expensive restaurants, and luxury spa websites. Charges I had never made. Charges that corresponded to the dates Chloe had bragged about a new dress, a fabulous meal, a relaxing spa day. She had been using our account as her personal slush fund. But the final, devastating blow came when we looked at our home equity line of credit. We had taken one out a few years ago for a kitchen renovation, and we had barely touched it since, or so I thought. The statement showed a series of large cash withdrawals over the past 2 years, totaling nearly $50,000. Each withdrawal corresponded to a time when Chloe had supposedly needed a large sum of money for one of her business ventures, the down payment on her pottery studio, the purchase of a professional-grade kiln, the trip to Belgium to study with a master chocolatier. My mind reeled. The sheer scale of the deception was breathtaking. This wasn't just a few $100s here and there. This was a systematic, long-term financial assault. They had been bleeding us dry for years, all while smiling to our faces, all while calling me the grasping, ambitious one. The note in the cake was not the beginning, it was the culmination. It was the victory lap of a con artist who had gotten so arrogant, so sure of her own cleverness, that she couldn't resist rubbing her victim's face in it. She had called me a liar. The irony was so profound, so sickening, it almost made me laugh. The silence in the room was broken only by the sound of my own ragged breathing. I felt a strange sense of vertigo, as if the floor had dropped out from under me. The financial betrayal was staggering, but it was the emotional betrayal that cut the deepest. This wasn't just about money, it was about trust. It was about the fundamental belief that the people who claimed to love you would not actively seek to destroy you. Helen's constant criticism, her subtle undermining, her attempts to paint me as unstable, it all made a horrifying kind of sense now. It wasn't just petty jealousy. It was a calculated strategy to keep me off balance, to make me question my own perceptions, to ensure that if I ever did discover the truth, no one would believe me. She wasn't just an accomplice, she was the architect of the entire deception. She had provided the emotional cover for her daughter's financial crimes. Liam looked like he had been punched in the gut. His face was ashen, his expression a mixture of disbelief and a terrible dawning rage. This was his family, his mother, his sister, the 2 women he had spent his entire life loving and protecting. And they had betrayed him in the most profound way imaginable. "How?" he whispered, his voice hoarse. "How did they do this without us knowing?" We pieced it together, the ugly puzzle of their deceit. The paperless statements that went to an email address I didn't recognize. The way Helen would always offer to help with the mail when she visited, likely intercepting any stray bank statements or credit card offers. The small, seemingly innocent lies that now seemed sinister in retrospect. It was a conspiracy, a long con, and we had been the unwitting marks. The anger came slowly at first, a low, simmering heat. But as the full scope of their betrayal settled in, it grew into a white-hot inferno. I thought of all the things we had given up, the vacations we hadn't taken, the home repairs we had postponed, the savings we had struggled to build. We had been living a life of careful, responsible frugality, all while my sister-in-law was living a life of luxury on our dime. I thought of Lily. I thought of the future we were trying to build for her, a future that had been systematically plundered by her own aunt and grandmother. The cold, hard rage I had felt at the party returned, but this time it was different. It was not the hot, explosive anger of a momentary confrontation. It was a deep, cold, and calculating fury. This was not a family dispute. This was a crime. And they were not going to get away with it. "What do we do?" I asked Liam, my voice steady now, my mind clear. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a grim determination I had never seen before. "First," he said, his voice like flint, "we call the bank and freeze everything. Then we call a lawyer, and then we call the police." The next morning, we began the process of dismantling our lives and rebuilding them on a foundation of truth. It was a grim, methodical task. We spent hours on the phone with fraud departments, our voices flat and emotionless as we repeated the same story over and over again. "I'm calling to report a series of unauthorized transactions. My name is Sophia Myers. My husband is Liam Myers. The perpetrator is my sister-in-law, Chloe Myers." With each call, a piece of the financial wreckage was cleared away. Accounts were frozen. Credit cards were cancelled. Investigations were opened. It was a small, bureaucratic victory, but it felt momentous. It was the first step in taking back control. We met with a lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman who specialized in financial fraud. We laid out the entire story, from the subtle emotional manipulation to the blatant theft. We showed her the bank statements, the credit card bills, the home equity loan withdrawals. She listened patiently, her expression growing more and more grim. When we were finished, she looked at us, her eyes filled with a mixture of sympathy and professional outrage. "This is one of the most egregious cases of familial fraud I have ever seen," she said. "This is not just a civil matter, this is criminal. You have every right to press charges." The words hung in the air, both terrifying and validating. Pressing charges, against our own family. It was a line we had never imagined crossing. It meant turning a private betrayal into a public record. It meant the complete and utter destruction of what was left of our family. But what was left? A hollowed-out shell, a facade of love and loyalty that concealed a rotten core of greed and deceit. The family we thought we had didn't exist. It was a fiction, and we had been living in it for far too long. Liam, who had always been the peacekeeper, the one who tried to smooth things over, was resolute. The betrayal had severed something deep inside him. The son who had loved his mother and sister was gone, replaced by a man who had been pushed too far. "We're pressing charges," he said, his voice firm. "I want them held accountable, for everything." That afternoon, we walked into our local police station. The sterile, impersonal environment felt a world away from the pastel-coloured nightmare of Lily's party. We sat down with a detective, a tired-looking man with kind eyes, and we told him our story. We gave him the copies of the financial statements, the timeline of the fraud, the names of the perpetrators. He listened patiently, taking notes, his expression unreadable. When we were done, he looked at us, his gaze lingering on Liam. "It's a tough thing," he said quietly, "when the bad guys are your own blood." He was right. It was a tough thing. But it was also a necessary thing. As we walked out of the police station, the sun was beginning to set. I felt a strange sense of lightness, as if a great weight had been lifted from my shoulders. The path ahead was going to be long and difficult. There would be a legal battle, a public reckoning, a final, painful severing of ties. But for the first time in a very long time, I felt free. The war was far from over, but we had chosen our battlefield, and we were no longer fighting alone. The news that we had filed a police report hit the family like a nuclear bomb. The initial shockwave was followed by a torrent of frantic, hysterical phone calls. Not from Helen or Chloe, who had gone completely silent, but from the extended family, the aunts, uncles, and cousins, who had been deputized as flying monkeys in this twisted drama. My aunt-in-law Brenda was the first to call, her voice shrill with disbelief and outrage. "Sophia, Liam, what have you done? Your mother is a complete wreck. You've called the police on your own family. It's a disgrace." Liam took the call, his voice a low, dangerous monotone. "Brenda," he said, "my mother and my sister have stolen over $50,000 from us. They have committed multiple felonies. The disgrace is theirs, not ours. Do not call here again." He hung up the phone, his hand trembling slightly. The calls kept coming, a relentless barrage of guilt and recrimination. "You're tearing this family apart," one uncle shouted. "Chloe made a mistake. Can't you find it in your heart to forgive?" another aunt pleaded. They didn't see the years of manipulation, the calculated cruelty, the systematic theft. They only saw a disruption to the family's carefully maintained facade of normalcy. They saw us as the aggressors, the ones who had broken the unspoken rule of silence, the ones who had aired the family's dirty laundry in public. We were the problem, not the people who had committed the crimes. It was a masterclass in victim blaming, and it was a testament to the powerful hold Helen had over her extended family. She had spent years cultivating an image of herself as a loving, long-suffering matriarch, and they were not willing to let that image go, even in the face of overwhelming evidence to the contrary. We stopped answering the phone. We let the calls go to voicemail, a chorus of angry, pleading, and disappointed voices that we deleted without listening to. We were an island, the two of us, and we had pulled up the drawbridge. The outside world, with its misguided loyalties and its willful blindness, could rage all it wanted. We were safe inside. The legal process began to grind forward, slowly and impersonally. We had to give formal statements to the detectives. We had to sign releases for our financial records. We had to compile a mountain of evidence, a paper trail of betrayal that stretched back for years. It was a painful, exhausting process, but with each step, we felt a growing sense of empowerment. We were no longer victims. We were participants in our own rescue. We were taking back our lives, one notarized document at a time. We also had to tell Lily what was happening, in a way that a 7-year-old could understand. We sat her down one evening, our hearts heavy. "Sweetheart," Liam began, "you know how sometimes people make very bad choices? Well, Auntie Chloe and Grandma Helen made some very bad choices. They took something that didn't belong to them, and that's called stealing. And because they did that, we won't be seeing them for a while." Lily's eyes filled with tears. "But I love Grandma," she whispered. My heart broke for her. This was the true cost of their actions, the innocent victim caught in the crossfire. "I know you do, sweetie," I said, hugging her tightly. "And she loves you. But sometimes, even people we love do things that are wrong, and when they do, there are consequences." It was a harsh lesson for a child to learn, but it was the truth. And we were done with lies. The investigation dragged on for months. The police interviewed Chloe and Helen, who, according to our lawyer, denied everything. They claimed the money was a gift, a loan they had intended to repay, a misunderstanding. They painted Liam as a disgruntled son, and me as a manipulative, vindictive daughter-in-law who had turned him against his own family. They were trying to create a he said, she said situation, to muddy the waters, to make it a matter of family drama rather than criminal activity. But the evidence was undeniable. The paper trail was a clear, unambiguous roadmap of their crimes. The unauthorized transfers, the credit card charges, the forged signatures on the loan documents, it was all there, in black and white. The district attorney's office agreed to press charges. The case would go to court. The news sent another shockwave through the family. The whispers and accusations turned into a roar. We were ostracized, cut off from the family entirely. We were not invited to holiday gatherings. We received no birthday cards, no Christmas gifts. It was as if we had ceased to exist. In a way, it was a relief. The silence was a balm after years of toxic noise, but it was also a profound loss. Liam, in particular, felt the pain of the schism. He was mourning the loss of his family, not the family they were, but the family he had always believed them to be. He was grieving a lifetime of lies. We leaned on each other, our little family of 3 becoming our entire world. We found a new community, a chosen family of friends who had seen us through the worst of it, who had never doubted us, who had shown up with lasagna and bottles of wine and offers to babysit. They were our true family, the ones who had earned our trust and our love. The court date was set. We knew we would have to face them, to sit in the same room, to testify against them. The prospect was daunting, but we also knew it was the final step, the last battle in a long and brutal war. We had to see it through. We had to get justice, not just for ourselves, but for Lily. We had to show her that the truth matters, that right and wrong are not relative, and that no one, not even family, is above the law. We prepared for the trial, our lawyer coaching us, walking us through the process. We were ready. We were nervous, we were scared, but we were ready. We had lost our family, but we had found our strength, and we were not going to back down. The day of the trial was grey and overcast, a perfect reflection of our mood. The courtroom was a cold, impersonal space, all polished wood and somber flags. It felt a world away from the sun-drenched backyard where our nightmare had begun. Seeing Helen and Chloe in person for the first time in almost a year was a jolt. They were sitting at the defendant's table with their lawyer, a slick, expensive-looking man in a tailored suit. They looked smaller, diminished, stripped of the power and authority they had always wielded in their own home. Helen was dressed in a conservative navy blue suit, her face pale and drawn. She looked like a frightened bird, a far cry from the imperious matriarch I had known. Chloe was wearing a simple black dress, her flamboyant, artistic style gone. She stared straight ahead, her face a mask of sullen resentment. They refused to look at us. The trial was a blur of legal jargon, of objections and sidebars, of the slow, tedious process of justice. But when it was my turn to take the stand, everything came into sharp focus. I walked to the witness box, my heart pounding, my hands cold. I sat down, took a deep breath, and looked at the jury, a sea of ordinary, impassive faces, and I told them my story. I started with the subtle digs, the backhanded compliments, the constant feeling of being an outsider. I told them about the party, the cake, the note. I told them about the late-night discovery of the theft, the years of financial deception. I spoke calmly, clearly, my voice steady. I did not cry. I did not raise my voice. I just stated the facts. The defense attorney tried to rattle me. He tried to paint me as a bitter, jealous woman who was angry about her husband's close relationship with his family. He tried to suggest that the money was a gift, that I had known about it all along, that this was all a vindictive plot to get back at my in-laws for some perceived slight. But his accusations bounced off the solid wall of my truth. I had the bank statements, I had the credit card bills, I had the forged documents, I had the facts, and the facts were undeniable. Liam's testimony was even more powerful. He spoke of his love for his mother and sister, his voice thick with a genuine, heartbreaking sorrow. He spoke of his shock and betrayal at their deception. He spoke of the pain of losing his family. He was not an angry, vengeful son. He was a man who had been deeply wounded by the people he trusted most, and his quiet, dignified testimony was devastating. The jury was out for less than 2 hours. The verdict was guilty, on all counts. The aftermath of the verdict was not the triumphant, celebratory moment I had imagined. There was no joy in watching my husband's mother and sister being led out of a courtroom in disgrace. There was only a profound, aching sadness. We had won, but it felt like a hollow victory. The sentencing happened a few weeks later. Given their lack of a prior criminal record, they were spared jail time, but the punishment was still severe. They were sentenced to 5 years of probation, ordered to pay full restitution of the stolen money, and mandated to perform hundreds of hours of community service. Their lives, as they knew them, were over. The house they had lived in for 40 years had to be sold to pay the restitution and their legal fees. Their social standing in their small town was obliterated. They were no longer the respected, influential family they had always pretended to be. They were convicted criminals, disgraced and shunned. We never saw them again. We heard through the grapevine that they had moved to a different state, hoping to escape the shame and start over, but we knew that they would take their dysfunction with them. People like them don't change. They just find new victims. Our lives, on the other hand, began to heal. The restitution payments started to arrive, small, regular reminders of our hard-won victory. We slowly rebuilt our savings, our future, our lives. But the real healing was not financial, it was emotional. The silence from my in-laws was a gift. The absence of their toxic presence was a balm to my soul. I had not realized how much of my energy, my mental space, had been consumed by them until they were gone. It was like living with a constant, low-grade fever that you don't even notice until it's gone, and you suddenly remember what it feels like to be healthy. We focused on our little family of 3. We took the vacations we had always dreamed of. We renovated our house. We filled our lives with laughter, with friends, with peace. We created a home that was a true sanctuary, a place of love and trust and unwavering support. Lily thrived. She was a happy, confident, and resilient child. The birthday party, the note, the trialet was all a distant, fuzzy memory for her. We had protected her from the worst of the fallout, and she had emerged from the storm unscathed. She was our greatest victory, our most precious prize. Years passed. The sharp edges of the betrayal began to soften. The anger faded, replaced by a quiet, distant pity. I no longer thought of Helen and Chloe with rage, but with a kind of sad detachment. They were 2 deeply unhappy, broken people who had tried to fill the emptiness inside them by taking from others. It was a pathetic, destructive way to live, and I was grateful every day that I had escaped their orbit. One day, I received a letter in the mail. It was from Helen. My first instinct was to throw it away, to not let her poison back into my life. But curiosity got the better of me. I opened it, my hands trembling slightly. The letter was not an apology. It was not an admission of guilt. It was a long, rambling screed of self-pity and blame. She wrote of her heartbreak, her shame, her ruined life. She accused me of being cold, unforgiving, and cruel. She said that she prayed for me every day, that she hoped I would one day find it in my heart to forgive her. It was the letter of a classic narcissist, unable to see beyond her own wounded pride, incapable of taking responsibility for her own actions. She was still the victim in her own story. And I was still the villain. I read the letter, and I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, no guilt. Just a profound, final sense of closure. She would never change. She would never understand. And I was finally, truly, okay with that. I tore the letter into small pieces and threw it in the trash. It was the last piece of their garbage I would ever have to deal with. My life was my own now, clean and uncluttered and free. My life with Liam and Lily blossomed in the quiet space left by the absence of my in-laws. We became fiercely protective of our peace, our little island of sanity in a chaotic world. We learned to trust again, not just each other, but ourselves. We had navigated the storm and emerged stronger, more united, more in love than ever before. We had faced the worst, and we had survived. We taught Lily about the importance of boundaries, of honesty, of kindness. We also taught her that sometimes the kindest thing you can do for yourself is to walk away from people who hurt you, even if they are family. It's a hard lesson, but a vital one. We gave her a childhood filled with love, security, and unwavering support, the kind of childhood that builds a strong, resilient adult. We gave her the one thing my husband and I had to fight so hard to win for ourselves, a safe place to call home. Sometimes, I think about the note in the cake. Those 6 little words, designed to destroy me, had, in a strange way, saved me. They were the catalyst, the spark that ignited the fire that burned down the prison of my old life. Chloe had meant for them to be a curse, but they had turned out to be a gift. They had given me the truth, and the truth, as they say, had set me free. So, I stand by our decision. We did what we had to do, not just to protect our finances, but to protect our family, our sanity, our future. We drew a line in the sand, and we defended it with everything we had. It was a brutal, painful, and ugly war, but it was a war we had to win. Because the alternative was to continue to live a lie, to allow ourselves to be slowly drained, emotionally and financially, by people who saw our love as a weakness to be exploited. The alternative was to teach our daughter that it's okay to be a doormat, that it's better to keep a false peace than to stand up for the truth, and that was a price we were not willing to pay. We chose the hard path, the path of confrontation, of truth, of justice, and it has led us to a place of peace and happiness we never could have imagined. But I still wonder what you think. When the betrayal comes from within your own family, when the people who are supposed to love you most are the ones who are secretly destroying you, what is the right thing to do? Did we go too far, taking a private family matter into a public courtroom? Or was it the only way to stop the cycle of abuse and finally get the justice we deserved? You tell me.